Ukraine is getting closer to joining the European Union. Even despite Budapest's obstacles, Kyiv's European integration is proceeding according to plan. The EU has launched a new format of negotiations with Ukraine, bypassing Hungary's veto.
We are moving forward, and Ukraine is implementing reforms and making progress.
Ukraine will not be left without support. How to strengthen its defense and improve its position. At the negotiating table, coalition leaders discussed these issues, what Kyiv's allies agreed upon. NATO is in danger. The head of the alliance is convinced that Russia's next target is one of the European countries in the bloc. To avoid a major war, Rutte urges allies to strengthen defense and continue supporting Ukraine.
I warn that what is happening in Ukraine could also happen to allied countries, and we need to shift to a wartime mindset.
Good evening, my name is Mikhail Baranov, and now let's go into more detail. The Coalition of the Willing held a meeting in a remote format. The main topic was the discussion of security guarantees. According to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, it is important that they include serious elements of European deterrence and are reliable. The president noted that the United States supports this position since no one is interested in a third invasion by the Russian Federation.
We had a conversation with the American team about possible security guarantees for Ukraine, and we are working on a framework document. It needs to be strong enough to actually work. We believe that this document should be approved by the US Congress. This would mean real, reliable, legally binding security guarantees for our country, and they must actually be implemented. Of course, a working model of security guarantees is impossible, and we have emphasized this, that it is impossible without Europe and all members of our coalition who are willing, from Canada to Japan to Australia and New Zealand.
The only option for a ceasefire is the signing of a framework agreement. This was stated by Volodymyr Zelenskyy during a conversation with journalists. According to the president of Ukraine, Russia will not stop hostilities until there are clear conditions. Zelenskyy emphasized that Kyiv has conveyed an updated position on the peace plan to Washington. This is a response to the version of the document that American negotiators discussed in Moscow.
The version we handed over to the American team reflects our vision, but it also includes European issues. That is, the European vision is not the final plan. This is a response to what we received under the conditions that already existed before. The initial plan of 28 points had already been revised. The plan was reduced to 20 points. That is this one. The plan is constantly being worked on and revised, and this is an ongoing process that continues even now. Importantly, this plan is not a single document. It is a set of documents. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine.
The US, Ukraine, and EU countries may discuss Trump's draft peace plan. December 13th. Axios reports this. The meeting is to take place in Paris. European countries will be represented by national security advisors. Who will represent the American side is still unknown. In addition, Volodymyr Zelenskyy and European leaders want to have a phone conversation with President Trump this weekend. An informal meeting of ministers for European Union affairs was held in Lviv. 30 representatives from EU countries and Ukraine discussed EU expansion, a reparations loan for Ukraine, as well as the results of the reforms Kyiv has carried out this year. According to Taras Kachka, Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine, Ukraine has completed all the technical stages of preparation to begin negotiations on joining the EU. And as early as next week, it will submit documents for 6 clusters. The Council of the European Union. In turn, EU Commissioner for Enlargement Marta Kos underlined that Ukraine will be part of the European Union. And she identified 10 priority areas of work for the coming year.
All of them are focused on strengthening the rule of law, combating corruption, and developing strong, accountable democratic institutions in Ukraine. And these institutions are necessary for Ukraine for the future accession process. This is one of our priorities for the coming years. We will not delay in moving Ukraine toward the European Union to build a future of peace and stability, not only for Ukraine, but for all of Europe.
Russian forces attacked energy facilities near Kremenchuk in the Poltava region. As a result of direct hits and falling debris, several structures caught fire. Some of the fire sources were extinguished overnight. In the morning, firefighters put out the remaining fires. According to local authorities, there were no fatalities or injuries. Also, due to Russian attacks, consumers in the Odessa region were left without power, according to Ukrenergo. Fires broke out at energy infrastructure facilities. At present, they have been extinguished, according to the State Emergency Service. 2 private residential houses and an administrative building were also damaged. There were no casualties or injuries. Around noon, Russian occupiers also shelled one of the residential districts of Kherson. According to local authorities, 3 people were injured as a result of the attack. Police officers took them to the hospital to provide the necessary medical assistance. All 3 suffered blast injuries and concussions.
Large-scale Russian air attacks have caused serious disruptions in Ukraine's power system and in the external power supply to 3 nuclear power plants. This led to a reduction in the output of certain reactors and temporary shutdowns of power units, said IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi. According to him, nuclear safety systems at the operating plants continue to function properly, and emergency power sources remain fully available. These disruptions led to fluctuations in electricity production, temporary outages, and forced shutdowns of individual power units. In several cases, units were disconnected from the grid or operated at reduced capacity to maintain grid balance and prevent equipment damage after sudden activation of protection systems. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, from a statement on the agency's website. Nearly 156,000 military personnel have been concentrated by the Russians on one of the key fronts, Pokrovsk. According to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Alexander Syrskyi, intense fighting continues there. Also, despite complicated logistics, Myrnohrad is not encircled by the occupiers. In total, since the beginning of the day, 108 combat engagements have been recorded in the combat zone. More details about the situation on the front line are coming up next. Russian troops continue their assaults near Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region and in the Lyman direction in Donetsk. This was reported by Viktor Trehubov, head of the communications department of the Joint Forces Group. The occupiers in Vovchansk are trying to push out the Ukrainian defenders, but they are not succeeding. The enemy continues to exert pressure near Vovchansk and in the Lyman direction. There are also ongoing attempts to break through toward Kupiansk, but without much success. In Kupiansk itself, Russian forces remain present in the northern districts of the city, where they are taking losses and trying to reinforce their troops. In other areas, activity has not been very high in recent days. Viktor Trehubov, head of the communications department of the Joint Forces Group, speaking live on the Marathon and DNN. Operators of the Artan special unit of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense shared the results of their combat operations in the Lyman direction. The pilots discovered a shelter and Russian soldiers who unsuccessfully tried to hide there. There were also clashes in this direction near the settlements of Novoyegorovka, Grekovka, Derilova and Kolodyazy, and Zareknoye. Near Konstantinovka, Russian forces conducted assault operations near Shcherbinovka, Pleshcheyevka, Yablonovka, Rusiny Yar and towards Sofievka. And in the Pokrovsk direction, Ukrainian defenders repelled the invaders' attacks. Near Rodinske, Myrnohrad, Kotlin, Udakne, Molodetske and towards Novopavlivka.
Our advanced drones are also continuously monitoring the enemy's vulnerable rear, their crucial logistics lines, and all their strategic approaches. In other words, there are truly 2 distinct battles happening simultaneously, what can accurately be called a fierce ground battle, where our brave defenders effectively eliminate Russian occupiers who have infiltrated or penetrated the city and its outskirts, while at the same time a battle is taking place in the air. This is primarily a battle of small aviation.
Taking advantage of worsening weather conditions which complicate the use of drones, the Russians attempted another large-scale mechanized assault near Pokrovsk. However, Ukrainian defenders stopped the attack. In particular, operators from the 3rd Sivoboda Battalion destroyed a light armored tractor covered with so-called grills, along with an MLRS launcher and a D-30 howitzer. Meanwhile, Ukrainian soldiers from the 7th Air Assault Corps raised the blue and yellow flag in the center of Pokrovsk. The military emphasized that by doing so they refuted the fake statement by Russian propaganda about the alleged capture of the city.
For 16 months, they have been stuck like in a trap. Even though they are there, And it's true that they're hiding something, that they control a certain part of Pokrovsk. They're trying to hold on or to encircle Myrnohrad, but none of this is working out for them because everyone is doing their job excellently in their own place. I'll put it this way. The task, the armed forces of Ukraine and the defense forces as a whole have already overfulfilled the task, specifically in the Pokrovsk direction.
A group of Russian occupiers in civilian clothes tried to infiltrate the rear of the defense forces in the Huliaipol direction. This was reported by the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. According to the service, the enemy observed the positions of the Ukrainian defenders for some time and then, taking advantage of difficult weather conditions, attempted a deceptive maneuver. However, during their movement, the border guards neutralized the saboteurs. Underneath their civilian clothes, the attackers were found to be wearing Russian army uniforms. And over the past day, Ukraine's defense forces eliminated 1,460 Russian occupiers. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale war have exceeded 1,185,000 military personnel. In addition, the day before, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 7 armored combat vehicles, 23 artillery pieces, a multiple rocket launcher system, and 160 units of automotive equipment of the enemy. Ukrainian drones from the unmanned systems forces struck chemical plants in Russia where explosives for the Russian Federation's army are produced. This was reported by the commander of the unmanned systems forces, Robert Magyar Brody.
According to him, as a result of the attack, 2 plants were damaged. These are Okron in Veliki Novgorod, which produces nitric acid, ammonia, and ammonium nitrate, as well as Dorogobush in the Smolensk region. There, they produce substances used in the manufacture of TNT, Octogen, RDX, and other explosives. Drones halted the operation of a Russian oil production platform in the Caspian Sea. This was reported by Freedom sources in the Security Service of Ukraine. A facility belonging to the company Lukoil Nizhne Volzhsk Neft was attacked. This is the first strike on Russia's oil infrastructure in the Caspian Sea. At least 4 hits on the facility have been recorded. Oil and gas production have been halted. I should note that this field is considered one of the largest in the Russian sector of the Caspian Sea. Its reserves are estimated at 129 million tons of oil and 30 billion cubic meters of gas.
The Security Service of Ukraine continues successful special operations against the Russian oil and gas sector, constantly expanding their geographic scope. An explosion in the Caspian Sea. This is yet another reminder to the Russian Federation that all its enterprises working for the war are legitimate targets wherever they may be located. Source: Freedom in the Security Service of Ukraine.
NATO chief Mark Rutte believes that the alliance is the Kremlin's next military target. He also emphasized that the Russian regime has become brazen, reckless, and ruthless. And right now, China is Russia's lifeline, allowing it to continue its war against Ukraine. Rutte noted that NATO allies are already in danger, and although Western countries have started to increase their defense budgets, it is not enough.
We are Russia's next target, and we are already in danger. When I became NATO Secretary General last year, I warned that what is happening in Ukraine could also happen to allied countries and that we need to shift to a wartime mindset.
Nevertheless, Mark Rutte is confident that Europe is capable of standing up to the Russian threat, not least thanks to Ukraine. He considers Germany to be one of the countries actively supporting Kyiv. At a joint press conference with Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he called Germany the driving force behind support for Ukraine among NATO countries. In turn, the head of the German government confirmed his commitment to this policy going forward and promised to continue putting pressure on the Russian Federation.
We firmly stand with Ukraine in order to achieve our common goals. To advance this work, we will continue to increase pressure on Moscow. And finally, we will also take tougher measures against the Shadow Fleet. At the same time, we will continue to provide large-scale support to Ukraine. Above all, we want to use frozen Russian assets in Europe so that Ukraine can effectively defend itself against future Russian attacks.
The European Union has come several steps closer to providing Ukraine with 90 billion euros from Russian assets, and it is making progress in preparing a reparations loan. Today, EU ambassadors approved the procedure for the indefinite freezing of Russian funds. This is one of the necessary conditions to secure the loan. Diplomats refer to Article 122 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, which provides the legal basis for the EU's emergency measures.
When does Article 122 come into effect? If we look at the past 5 years, we have often had to deal with unexpected economic crises, unexpected situations that had economic consequences. And it is precisely in such cases that we usually resorted to this article. And I think if we look at the current situation, we can confidently say that Russia's unjustified aggression against Ukraine is affecting not only Ukraine, of course, but also the broader economic situation in Europe. I think that today and in the coming days, a lot of attention will be focused on Ukraine. It's impossible to attend a meeting in Europe without paying attention to Ukraine at this truly critical moment. And it is very important that we, as the European Union, develop a mechanism to support Ukraine. This mechanism should essentially serve two purposes. First, it must provide Ukraine with fundamental support, here and now, because the need for funding is urgent. Second, it must ensure that Russia will pay. And I welcome the fact that today or tomorrow this week we will take measures to block Russian assets for a longer period. I think this is appropriate.
Despite the fact that the current proposal by the European Commission to use Russian assets raises concerns in Belgium, its budget minister Vincent van Petegem believes that the Russian Federation must pay for its aggression against Ukraine. And for this purpose, at some point, it may be precisely Russia's frozen assets that are used. This issue is very important. And to be clear, the goal and purpose here are also absolutely clear. Ukraine needs unwavering support. And Russia really must pay for the war, for the unjust war, and for its aggression. And the frozen assets must be used for this. The question, of course, is that today, as responsible politicians, we do have certain concerns. Thus, it is clear that we are considering the vulnerabilities as well as the legal and financial risks associated with the proposed option. But I know for sure that we are looking for constructive solutions, and I am confident that if we work together on this constructive solution, we will become stronger, as a union, as the European Union. Ukraine and Moldova are demonstrating steady progress in reforms. Therefore, in December, the European Union must make a clear political decision to open all negotiation clusters for both countries, said Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda during a meeting with EU Commissioner for Enlargement Marta Kos. The head of state emphasized that Ukraine's membership in the European Union is a necessity. Natalia Husak will continue on this topic.
Ukraine and Moldova are at the forefront of the European Union enlargement process, so their progress must be reflected in EU decisions, said the Lithuanian Minister of Foreign Affairs. According to him, the European Union must send clear and consistent signals in everything related to Ukraine's European integration, so that citizens see a real prospect of membership and reforms are carried out faster and more effectively.
Ukraine's membership in the EU is a necessary condition for European security. It is also one of the elements of Ukraine's security guarantees. Kęstutis Budrys, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, from a publication on the website of the Lithuanian National Radio and Television.
The President of Lithuania considers EU enlargement to be Europe's most important geopolitical tool. This will be Lithuania's key priority during its presidency of the EU Council. In 2027, Gitanas Nausėda assured, in the opinion of the head of state, it is necessary to set a target date for Ukraine's accession to the European Union in 2030. And Lithuania is calling to speed up the negotiations, use every opportunity, and immediately move to political decisions. And already in the first half of 2026, when Cyprus will hold the presidency of the EU Council, Ukraine may be able to open 3 negotiation clusters for joining the European Union out of the 6 required.
We must and we will act in this direction during our presidency to advance the process of European Union enlargement, strengthening, among other things, our collective security and our democratic resilience. And we will act first and foremost in the interests of Ukraine. We will do everything necessary to preserve and strengthen the country's European prospects on the European Union's agenda. In
early November 2025, the European Commission published a report on the framework of the EU enlargement program. The document gives high marks to Ukraine's progress, and the European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, stated that the European Commission is working to ensure that the negotiation clusters for Ukraine and Moldova's accession to the European Union can be opened by the end of November. At present, this process is being hindered by Hungary's position, which consistently blocks Ukraine's European integration. But negotiations are ongoing, noted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. After all, Ukraine's EU membership is part of the European Union's security policy.
We discussed the overall European order in detail. Today, Europe is shaping a new global role for itself. All the events unfolding over the past nearly 4 years indicate that Europe's role must truly be a strong one. This depends on every country, every leader. Ukraine has given Europe a significant unifying impulse, and this energy is helping to strengthen Europe.
It is precisely in supporting Ukraine that we see new mechanisms already being formed, as well as a completely new mindset regarding what security truly should be, and quite naturally, the essential security guarantees, which are fundamental, will grow out of this very process. Here's another telling point. Ukraine itself, as President Zelenskyy consistently states, is undeniably a crucial and integral element of Europe's overall security and stability. And in principle, partners are confirming this even now.
The timeline for Ukraine's accession to the EU depends on the implementation of reforms, stated European Commission spokesperson Guillaume Mercier. According to him, Ukraine has adopted roadmaps on the rule of law, state governance and the functioning of democratic institutions, as well as an action plan for national minorities, which was positively assessed in Brussels.
Despite Russia's ongoing aggressive war, Ukraine remains firmly committed to its path toward EU membership, having successfully completed the screening process and made progress on key reforms. Guillaume Mercier, spokesperson for the European Commission, in a comment to RBC Ukraine.
On December 10th, the EU Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, arrived in Ukraine for a 2-day visit. According to the European Commission's press service, she intends to discuss Ukraine's European integration at an informal meeting of ministers from EU member states. The Commissioner will also hold a series of meetings with politicians and representatives of Ukrainian civil society.
Peace and the future of Ukraine depend solely on the determination of international partners. Since Russia is not ready for a settlement, said Latvian President Edgars Rinkēvičs after meeting with the President of Poland. On Thursday, Karol Nawrocki visited NATO troops at the Adazi military base in Latvia. He emphasized Poland's commitment to regional security and its obligations on NATO's eastern flank. Edgars Rinkēvičs in turn stated that issues of security, hybrid attacks, and support for Ukraine were discussed. In particular, the efforts of the Presidents of the United States and Ukraine, which are aimed at achieving peace. Meanwhile, in Georgia, the authorities are increasingly restricting the freedoms of their citizens. The country's parliament has tightened the rules for holding protest by passing yet another bill from the pro-Russian ruling party, Georgian Dream. According to the new rules, holding a demonstration in a public place without prior notice is prohibited. The Ministry of Internal Affairs must be notified 5 days before the rally. In the case of an unauthorized demonstration, participants will be given 15 minutes to disperse. Otherwise, law enforcement will disperse the demonstrators by force. Russia has stepped up its activities in the occupied Transnistria region, sources from Freedom in the main Directorate of Ukrainian Intelligence have reported. The Kremlin is transferring intelligence agents to the region, and drone operator training centers have been established there. Moscow wants to destabilize the situation in Moldova and increase the risk of sabotage groups infiltrating Ukrainian territory. Andriy Dvetrenko will tell you more about the tactics of the aggressor country.
The Moldovan authorities have blocked $107 million in cryptocurrency that was intended to finance pro-Russian forces, protests, and forceful actions, according to Foreign Minister Mihai Popsoi. The organizers preferred to use cryptocurrency for transactions in order to hide the money, since such transfers are harder to trace. The head of Moldova's foreign ministry emphasized that this is just one episode in a large-scale Russian interference operation.
We have learned these lessons and become more proactive, and much more cautious in standing up to those who want to deprive us of our democracy and sovereignty. The vast majority of Moldova's citizens have decided to turn the page on our post-Soviet past and firmly move toward our European future in a free world. Yes, there have been attempts to sabotage this process, but Moldova has resisted, which is a testament to the resilience of the Moldovan people.
Shortly before the information about the funds being blocked was made public, Moldovan oligarch Ilan Shor announced that he is shutting down all his so-called social programs in Moldova. In other words, he effectively admitted that his network of influence can no longer operate under the increased oversight from the authorities, as explained by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
According to investigators, Shor's social projects were used to finance pro-Russian protests and other actions aimed at destabilizing Moldova. Now, after the financial flows have been blocked and members of the group have been arrested, the oligarch is forced to wind down his activities. From a statement by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine on Telegram.
Ilan Shor fled Moldova in 2019. He was sentenced there to 15 years in prison for financial fraud. A year ago in Moscow, together with his associates, Shor announced the creation of the Victory Bloc, but the political force was not allowed to participate in the parliamentary elections. In response, Shor threatened a coup d'état.
We are creating a united national front that will stand in opposition. Its first task is to get out of prison and out of trouble those who are being persecuted by the Sandists. We will not abandon or forget our people.
A blow to Moldova's constitutional order could also come from Transnistria, sources from the Freedom TV channel reported, citing the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. According to these sources, intensified mobilization activities are being carried out in the region occupied by Russia. In addition, drone production facilities and training centers for drone operators have been set up there.
The Kremlin is sending intelligence agents to the region for information operations, provocations, and sabotage. The goal: to destabilize the situation in Moldova and increase the risk of sabotage groups infiltrating Ukrainian territory, according to sources from Freedom, citing the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense.
Recently, the occupation authorities of Transnistria asked Moscow to increase the number of Russian troops in the region to 10,000.
It is necessary to examine in detail what the operational group of Russian troops actually is, and to propose an appropriate solution for dismantling the structure. But at the same time, on the left bank, there is also the so-called Transnistrian army, and at 12 Manoilova Street in Tiraspol, there is the so-called Ministry of State Security, which is something like an analog of the KGB or NKVD, keeping the residents of the left bank in fear. There are all sorts of special battalions as well. Therefore, in my view, the unification of the country technically requires the complete demilitarization of this region.
Brussels will help Moldova become a member of the European Union, stated the European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos. She assured that the territory occupied by Russia and Transnistria will not become an obstacle to Chisinau's European integration.